Alright, so hey everyone. Today I want to take a look at the Deadzones for Valorant's beta. This is being demonstrated on the Xbox Series X. Just in case it differs on other platforms. It should be consistent though, given the options are accurate. If you notice any stuttering, like you might have seen there, my internet's really bad, so any of those are entirely on my connection, not the game. But to start, for movement, by default we have a 20% radial dead zone. And there is diagonal movement restricted around each axis. So if your stick is anywhere in these blue regions, you'll be moving, in this case, perfectly forward, perfectly backward, perfectly right, and perfectly left and perfectly right. And you only start seeing diagonal movement once you break into this green region. So to try to use this as a reference, I'll line myself here, and you can see that stick is moving at a pretty obvious angle, but I'm still aligned with it. But when I move into this green region, it moves pretty clearly away from it. With small movements, you can see that this is fully restricted. So if you pass into these regions, if I just move from here to here, I move perfectly forward to perfectly left. So for very small movements, you only have 4 directions available to you. But for full stick movements, you have this level of restriction, but you have, of course, much wider range, your full range of diagonals accessible in these slices. It's not too obvious here, but there are 2 movement speeds available, so you can walk within from the dead zone all the way to 98% by default, and then from there you run, and this is a perfectly radial threshold. Normally it would be ideal to have a full gradient of movement speeds. However, in this type of game, you have when you're walking you don't make sound, but when you're running you do. So having a clear-cut region for walking and running is the better move here, so there's no issue with that. But looking at the camera, by default we have a 10% radial dead zone, and the acceleration curve starts very slow, so it's not too obvious. But we also have axial restriction, but in a different type. So similar if your stick is within these regions, you only see perfect cardinal movement. So I'm bobbing this stick around this, but I'm moving perfectly to the right. It's not too clear seeing it around the vertical axis, but you can see it around the horizontal axis more clearly. There is some jittering when you cap the view like this, but you can see when diagonal movement would occur more clearly like this. This jittering does not occur when moving and not having a cap like this, so you can see that it's smooth there. It's pretty interesting having both types of, or at least 2 types of axial restriction. So an axial method here, which creates a pure cross, and this angular method, which has it so the restriction is consistent along the entirety of the stick range. For movement, I think it would have been ideal for that restriction to be applied here as well, but that doesn't matter as much. And of course, when you compare it to, say, mouse and keyboard, where they have only 8 directions accessible, that's not a huge deal. But looking at the maximum dead zone sizes, the outer dead zone options are accurate, but I'll keep this at 1 because there is no acceleration jump to really make that clear. But you can see here that this doesn't go quite to 1. But you can see these options are accurate. It's at 50%, and that gives us a 50% radial dead zone for the movement. And we have the same axial restriction here. So if I align myself there, you can see that I'm pointing at an angle, and you don't start seeing diagonal movement until you break out into out of these axial dead zones. The run threshold has just been expanded slightly, so now it's at 100%, it's at 98%. But it's still perfectly radial. Of course, the camera dead zone is also 50% at its maximum, and still perfectly radial. And it has the same exact angular restriction. This doesn't change with dead zone size. So for the minimum, you can see that movement doesn't quite go to 0, similar to the threshold didn't go to 1, but you can see here that that doesn't really matter because it's functionally 0 anyway. Any stick movement at all will create character movement. And you can see that the axial restriction more clearly, where it's a cross of restricted diagonal movement with a thresholds at the perfect diagonals, so perfectly down, perfectly forward, perfectly to the right, perfectly to the left. But you can see that reducing the run threshold has reduced that to the expected amount. And the camera is also, any stick movement will create camera movement. And the axial restriction is the same as it was. I'm going to change the movement dead zone back to default, just so I'm not drifting around. So as I mentioned with the angular restriction, for movement, this isn't a huge deal, though even though mouse and keyboard players are limited to 8 directions, that doesn't have a huge impact here. It would be nice if full diagonal movement was accessible, and if we could get options to control this a restriction for both the movement and the camera. For the camera specifically, well, I think the mindset behind having restricted angles like this would be if you're on headshot level, having vertical restriction would have it or make it easier to stay on that level. But my argument against that is if you're not on that level, you have to overcorrect to be able to make the angular adjustments to get back on that or aim where you want specifically. Because with any level of restriction, it makes it so that the direction you point the stick is not the direction that the camera moves. So having options would allow players to customize this so that players who are happy with the amount can just keep it as the default, whereas players who want full diagonal movement can set it there, or players who want a custom amount, either greater or some amount less, can do that. So having an option to control that for both sticks would be requested there. For the acceleration curve, we have a ton of options. So there are 9 curve presets available, and by default we have standard. I'm not going to go through all of them because most of it's just me spinning around. But for standard, we have a curve that starts low and then builds up to its maximum turn rate faster as you move the stick further. So a pretty standard exponential kind of curve. A linear curve, as expected, is perfectly linear. A few games have offered linear curves, but they haven't actually been linear, so this is definitely nice to see. So just it increases linearly, just as you expect, and if you could just you can see that the main difference is at the very small movements. This is much faster than it was with the standard curve. So the rest, or most of the rest, are kind of permutations of that. But what we want to look at specifically is aggressive and delayed. So aggressive is actually an S-curve, so it's not just a kind of, it starts out slow and then builds up pretty fast and then tapers off near the end. So basically around 70 to 100%. It doesn't seem like there's a huge difference. Just because it's sort of starting to taper off. And for the delayed curve, we have it start slow, then build up, and then there's kind of a step from about 40 to 60%, so not a huge change in movement speed in this range, though it is slightly increasing, but then it builds up towards its maximum turn rate near the end. So I'll just show the rest of them on screen. And there is a decent granularity to the options. The only criticism I think I'll give is there is a gap between the linear curve and when the more normal exponential curves the presets start occurring. And the only thing that fills these gaps is the aggressive and delayed curves. I think having an additional preset or two to fill in the space would be good to increase the granularity. But otherwise, 9 curves is considerably better than most other games I've played have only offered 3. So this is definitely an improvement over most of the other games I've played. I will say that I think that a slider controlling the degree of a power function would still be the most ideal. That would give you a huge amount of granularity, especially with some of the ridiculous amount of precision that these sliders offer. Like you can see that this is bringing it to the, was it 1000th or whatever, a level. So having a slider with this kind of control over the degree would really give players a ton of control that even these 9 or even 10, 11 presets could offer. So either option would be good, adding a few extra presets to fill in that gap, or just changing this entire thing to be a slider that has that goes through a full range of degrees from, say, like linear to cubic would cover this pretty fully. And of course, doing that would remove the kind of S-curve and the step curve from being available, but also what could be another option is having a preset for a curve type and then a slider on top of that, and that would allow you to have different functions with an extreme amount of granularity to control the intensity of each of those functions. So a few different options to improve that, but at least the base options are very good. There is aim smoothing applied in this game, and that causes your turn speed to build up over time. So if you push the stick fully, the camera won't start at the maximum turn speed. It'll start slower and then build up over a short period of time. And this is very obvious. I'll change the sensitivity to maximum to really demonstrate this clearly. So the maximum turn speed in this game is very fast. It's at 1200 degrees per second. But you can see that very fast movements create very small circles, and if I move back and forth, you might be able to see a slight lull before it reaches its full speed. You can see that you basically it's just, you can see the frames pretty clearly here, but when it's just turning around, you can see that it starts slower, and with quick movements, it makes much smaller circles than it would if there wasn't smoothing applied. And smoothing has an issue of making the controls feel a bit more sluggish and less predictable, because while your turn speed is building up, you don't have direct control, and that can make your aiming feel slower and less predictable because your turn speed is in flux for that duration. Of course, it can be slightly beneficial, which may be the intention here, so that quick movements won't move you too far, so it limits overshooting. But I think having an option to control smoothing, either a toggle to disable it or a slider to control the intensity of it, would be requested, so that players can control this and the way they want. For the sensitivity, I already mentioned the cap is very high. At 20, you get 1200 degrees per second. The default, I started this demonstration at 10, but the default is 6, and this is 360 degrees per second. So that's what this looks like. So a full rotation every second. And at the minimum sensitivity, at 1, we have 60 degrees per second. So that's what this looks like, very slow. So we have a very wide range of sensitivities accessible, and with the extreme amount of granularity you can with the precision mode, you have a ton of control over that. However, let's get this back to normal. We have advanced sensitivity options, and at the beginning of the beta, these were just normal options. But we have control over the vertical and horizontal sensitivities for each type. So we have, I'll demonstrate this here. So we have our base sensitivity, we have the focus sensitivity, and we have the ADS sensitivity. And lastly, we have the sniper sensitivity, which you have to have a sniper to use that. So I'll not demonstrate that for each one, but I'll just demonstrate the ranges for each of these sensitivities. Broadly, the focus sensitivity is 20% of the base sensitivity at the same value, or at the same values. The ADS is about 16.6% given the tests, and the sniper sensitivity is about 7.2% of the base sensitivity. And you can zoom in with the sniper, and when zooming in, the sniper is about 50% of the sniper sensitivity. And that's all fine. So I have no issues with that. One thing I do want to talk about is the vertical sensitivity. So the vertical sensitivity is not the same as the horizontal sensitivity. So you can see that they're all listed as exactly the same, but here's the horizontal sensitivity, and here's the vertical sensitivity. This is quite clearly different. And for the base sensitivity, at the same values, the vertical sensitivity for base is about 33% of the horizontal, so it's a third of your horizontal sensitivity. This differs for each sensitivity. So in focus, it's actually faster. So you can see here's the horizontal, and here's the vertical. It's much closer. This is about 83.3% sensitivity. And one thing to note is vertical sensitivities are a little inaccurate with testing, normally because the range isn't at full 180 degrees. Here it is. But I got pretty round numbers, so these should be pretty accurate. But getting back to it, so while you're in focus, the vertical sensitivity is about 83% of the horizontal. When you're in ADS, this is about, the vertical is about 70% of the horizontal. And when you're using a sniper, that's about 66.7% when using, the vertical sensitivity is 66.7% of the horizontal there. So this is actually inconsistent across each of these zoom methods. And I think that should be made the same so that it is consistent. That could be an issue for beta players because maybe they have their sensitivities dialed in perfectly here, and fixing that would change that. But it is a little inconsistent because while you can edit these so that they're approximately the same, that's inconsistent, because if you want the same sensitivity ratio, you have to have different horizontal and vertical sensitivities for each of these to make them the same. And that's very unintuitive. One thing that's very interesting here, though, is that normally having different vertical and horizontal sensitivities make it so that your diagonal movement is significantly affected, and that doesn't seem to be the case here. So if I try to demonstrate, so we saw that they're the same right now. If I move the stick, say let's use this bundle of bricks. If I move at about 45 degrees, you can see that I basically moved past this area. So from this direction to here. If we use an extreme one difference, normally having a differing axis sensitivities, your diagonals will be skewed towards the more sensitive axis. So in this case, at the same values, the horizontal sensitivity was faster, but at extreme values like this horizontal sensitivity should be much faster. But we'll see here that if I try using these bricks again and moving at about a 45-degree angle, you can see that while I was off a bit, it was moving to this area. I'll try to demonstrate more precise demonstrations. But you can see that was the same. So it doesn't seem like the axis sensitivity changes your diagonal movement, which is very rare in games. This is the only game that I've seen personally that does that. And you can see here that I flipped the axis ratios, moving at 45 degrees, but you can see that it, again, met this point. Of course, it can be set up this way. It's just most games have a simple horizontal and vertical implementation that does skew it in this way. One thing, however, is I think even despite this, I think the direction the stick is moving in is still horizontally biased. This might just be a placebo, but if I move the stick at about 45 degrees, it does seem like it's a little flatter to me than perhaps it should be. I'll try to demonstrate a few other games that have even horizontal and vertical axis sensitivities to try to compare this so that you can see. But while the sensitivities you play at doesn't seem to affect diagonal movement, the diagonal movement does, at least to me, seem horizontally skewed. So again, sensitivity is pretty subjective, so players who already have a distinct sensitivity settings may have some issue with correcting these, but I think it would be more intuitive for the vertical sensitivity to match the horizontal, and whatever latent direction bias that the stick is moving in being corrected, or maybe having not even an option to control the direction bias, so that by default it can remain the same, but edited to move in the expected direction would be requested there. So the last thing to cover is aim assist. So aim assist, they specifically mentioned that they didn't want to add an option, and I would definitely request an option being added. Aim assist in this game is relatively subtle compared to most other games. As far as I can tell, it uses a relatively standard tracking type, meaning you have, when your crosshair passes over a target, the sensitivity will slow down, and in this way I think it's pretty comparable to other games. However, the tracking when you're strafing left and right past a target, that seems to be heavily reduced compared to most other games, and that definitely works for the pace of this game. You're definitely not, quickly strafing or whatever as fast as other games. But I think with the relative limited aim assist, I think a toggle really wouldn't hurt anything. And I'm always an advocate for limiting aim assist in games anyway. I think it'd be kind of cool if this was a game that completely dropped all aim assist altogether, similar to how Rainbow Six Siege has done. But if just keeping the aim assist as is, I think just simply having an option for the to control the aim assist would be necessary, because in some cases the slowdown can make things feel inconsistent, because the sensitivity you're playing at when off target is different than the one that on target, and if two targets are next to each other, the tracking can fight with itself. So you may be dragged off the target you actually want to shoot, or together it can be difficult to deal with that. So just having an option for assist is all that's requested there. So there's been quite a bit of rambling, but to summarize some of the requests, overall I think the controls here are very good, and it's really nice to see this kind of quality of controls straight out the gate, especially with a more precision-oriented shooter. But there are some of the requests that I've gone through and summarized those. I think there should be an option to control the level of axial restriction. So while that doesn't matter as much for movement, for the camera, that definitely could be a benefit to get full diagonal movement, or for players that want axial restriction, to be able to customize that precisely. So a slider controlling that for both movement and the camera would be requested. At the very least, from allowing full diagonal movement up to the default, but the maximum of the slider can be whatever, as long as we have a range from no restricted movement to whatever. Then the other one would be to add additional curve options to fill in the gap between linear and the exponential curves, or to simply remove these presets and add a slider controlling the power function controlling the degree of a power function from a range of linear to cubic or whatever, to give that extra granularity. Or lastly, to have a toggle between types of functions with a slider controlling the intensity of that function. Then an aim smoothing toggle, so that either a toggle or a slider, so that players can control or disable the aim smoothing currently applied. And lastly, the sensitivity. So correct the vertical sensitivity options so that they're equal to the horizontal, so that if you set your vertical sensitivity and vertical sensitivity is the same, they're the same. So that if they're both 10 and 10, they should be the same sensitivity either way. And lastly, if that direction change, if the general, even if the vertical and horizontal axis sensitivities aren't skewing diagonal movement, if this seemingly horizontally biased general diagonal movement exists, it'd be nice to see that corrected so that we have correct diagonal movement being implemented, or have the player, or give the player control over how skewed they want their diagonal movement to be. And then lastly, add a namesys toggle. So that's about it. Sorry the video is so long, but hopefully we can see these things improved either on release or just over the course of the game's life. Because again, the controls I think overall are great. We have dead zone options, we have curve options, and very granular options for each of the zoom levels. But these additional ones I think would just be that extra bit of polish to make things perfect. So that about covers things. Thanks for watching, and everyone, have a great rest of your day.